Okay. No opinion. Dress? No opinion. With your girl, Vic.
Hello, babes. It's Nicole, and hi. I'm sorry it's been so long since I recorded last, but I just really haven't had the time. My life's been fucking crazy, as I'm sure yours have been too. The world's been crazy. Everything's just fucking crazy. But I'm happy to be back and talking with you guys. I want to thank everybody who has downloaded and listened to the episodes so far. Your support means everything to me, and I just am honestly blown away that people still want to listen to my crazy antics and the things that I have to say. Thank you. Keep coming back. Let's get into this episode. Let's talk about something that really ruffles my feathers, and that is the way that women are portrayed in movies and on television when they're pregnant and about to give birth. I'll break down the picture that we always see, and that is the woman's water breaks. 10 minutes later, she's pushing out her child. And it's not realistic. That's not what happens. That's why you hear of women who are in labor for 24 hours, even 48 hours, because it is quite a process, and there is many stages that your body goes through before you get to the end stage / result, which is pushing and actually having your baby. But it's just so funny how many people think that's actually how it happens. Like when you are 9 months along, your water's just gonna break and you're gonna get a huge splash all over the floor. You're gonna feel like you pissed yourself, and then 10 minutes later your baby's gonna be in your arms. I generally feel like that's how everybody views it, and that's what everybody's expecting. So when that doesn't happen, people start to freak out, and they're like, oh my god, why didn't my water break, blah 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 blah. The fear sets in, because that is supposed to be normal, your water breaking and it going everywhere, and then you literally dropping to your knees screaming from contractions, and then the baby comes. So let's just break down what actually happens, because we're all about education on this podcast. Let's talk about your due date, because due dates are typically off by about 1 to 2 weeks. And the reason why is because they go off your last period. And unless you are actively tracking your sex and ovulation cycles, there's a really big chance you aren't going to know your last period date. And that's not when it ended, when it started. And I could do a whole episode about this, but typically what happens in movies is you get your due date, and the baby comes out on that date, and it's just so falsely portrayed because, like I just said, due dates are usually typically off by 1 to 2 weeks, and so people tend to panic when it's quote unquote too early or too late, and we see that all the time. So if you are one of the rare beings who give birth on your exact given due date, then you are an anomaly. That doesn't usually happen. It's very rare, and labor, again, doesn't just start out of nowhere. Even if you have your baby right on your due date, your body's still going to give you all of the warning signs that you are preparing to go into labor before it even happens. And I want to break down what some of those signs are with you so that you don't have to be scared when you start to experiencing them, because they're totally normal, and it's 100% your body preparing you and getting you ready for birth. It's also important to remember that everyone's body is so different, and everyone experiences pregnancy so very different from each other. So your symptoms may not be the same as someone else's in terms of pre-labor and your body warning you, or they could be the same exact symptoms in reversed order. Things aren't always as straightforward as they seem, and everybody is different. So it's not like a checklist, oh, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. It's completely like grabbing a handful of Skittles out of a bowl, and whatever colors you get is going to be totally different than the colors the person next to you get. It's the same idea. So let's break down some of the warning signs so that you can understand what your body's doing when your body's doing it, and understand that labor just doesn't spontaneously happen out of nowhere. Okay, let's do it. Let's talk about Braxton Hicks, the event that inspired the name of this podcast in Friends. So Braxton Hicks are basically practice contractions, right? Not every single person who is pregnant experiences them. And Rachel Green seriously has a fucking problem with this, you guys. If you know what I'm talking about, you know. Basically, Braxton Hicks, like I said, are practice contractions, and your uterus is just preparing you for what is to come. And it's actually preparing itself for what is to come, if you think about it, because it's a muscle and your uterus is what houses your baby. When it contracts, that is the action that you want to happen to be able to give birth and push your baby out. That's ultimately what contractions are. They're the muscle and the uterus contracting so that it pushes your baby further and further down the birth canal and then eventually into your arms. So some women will experience it and not feel them. On the flip side, other women or people who are pregnant will feel these Braxton Hicks, and can be a little bit alarming because it's definitely an unusual feeling having a huge muscle contraction in your stomach. And when it's your first time, it's your first pregnancy, it can be scary because ultimately you don't want anything to harm the little being that you're carrying. And often people will have themselves evaluated by a medical doctor when they do start to experience these symptoms, because it is usually in the third trimester that this happens. So you can understand where panic comes from when this is happening and you know you're so close, and it can be alarming. But I'm here to tell you that it is completely normal. It's just your body practicing and preparing you for the big event. And if you are one of the lucky ones who don't, really feel the Braxton Hicks contractions, it doesn't mean that later down the road you aren't going to feel your contractions as intensely. And I honestly, this is another topic I could record an entire podcast on, is contractions and the pain that comes with them, and how it's a good pain, and you have to really understand in your mindset that it's not a harmful pain, which is hard to do because our mind is programmed to recognize pain as a threat. So again, I could do a whole podcast on that episode. If you guys want me to, let me know and we can dive into that. And then if you have any questions about Braxton Hicks more specifically, you can also just shoot a message to the Instagram page and I will be sure to answer all of your questions. Braxton Hicks, that's it. Let's move on. Next on the roster, we have your mucus plug. And what this is a collection of cervical mucus, obviously located at the bottom of your cervix, the part that opens up. And what it does is it plugs that little opening to prevent any bacteria or anything that you don't want to harm your baby going up the cervix and reaching the womb and reaching the baby. So it's a really good preventative and protective measure that your body just does all on its own. So naturally, because this is such a important defense mechanism for your baby, your body wants to keep it as long as possible. So it's really, really, really towards the end of your pregnancy that you're going to lose the mucus plug or pass the mucus plug. And what that can look like is a giant ball of mucus. It looks like snot a little bit. There can be blood in it. That's why it can also be called a bloody show. And it's not to be alarmed by. It's completely normal if there's a little bit of blood in it. And it can be quite gross, to be honest. It's not the nicest thing. But basically it is your cervix opening up and getting ready to pass the baby. So you can imagine if this plug is being held in by the cervix, that as the cervix starts to loosen and open, it's going to let go of the plug essentially. So towards the end of the third trimester, that's something obviously you really have to look out for, along with Braxton Hicks. And 99.9% of women will experience losing their mucus plug because it essentially has to come out for the baby to be able to come out. And lastly, but not least, but the last one I'm going to talk about today is just joint pain and body aches. because your body is getting ready to relax everything and able to open up and allow the baby to be born and pass through the birthing canal, and it's really a magical thing. However, it is intensified by this hormone called relaxin, which really spikes in the third trimester. And unfortunately, it doesn't just target specific ligaments and muscles and things like that to tell them to loosen up, such as your hips. For example, you want your hips to loosen up so you can pass the baby. But relaxin does not give two fucks. Like, it affects every single ligament in your body. So that's why it's extremely important to be really careful in the third trimester, because injury can be more prevalent due to this. And you'll notice that things like your wrists will start hurting, just like joints in general. And it's a really fucking fun time. But I promise, as soon as the pregnancy is over, it will go back to normal. Everything will eventually come back to where it's supposed to be. But you may just feel more achy, and you have to be a little bit more cautious in the third trimester, which I'm sure most people are anyways. So those are 3 of the biggest warning signs, in my opinion, that you are going to go into labor soon. And those are the things that you should be looking for to tell you, oh, this might be happening. And not to be nervous, but know that these signs are just there to prepare you. And that's when we move into actual labor. Because in the movies, like I said at the beginning, it's like, bam, your contractions start, bam. 2 minutes later, your water breaks, bam. 3 minutes later, your baby's in your arms. And it's just so, like, laughable, because realistically and scientifically, there are 3 distinct phases to labor. You have pre-labor or early labor, and then you have your transitional period, where you switch from early labor into active labor. And active labor is the phase where you are actually fully contracting, fully getting ready to push your baby out. So there's 3 really important stages and phases, and I'm not going to get into the logistics of each one, because again, that could be a whole other podcast episode. But each person and each pregnancy will experience these phases not only at a different time frame, but also in intensity, because pregnancy for everybody is just so completely different. And I think that a lot of people obviously think it's bing bang boom, but early labor could honestly take 24 hours in its own, especially if it's your first pregnancy. Things may progress a little bit slower because your body's not used to it. It's kind of doing this for the first time. And then in further pregnancies, things could progress quicker, and usually that actually is what happens. But it's totally normal that the stages and phases will progress differently for each person. And the time frame isn't always like a checklist, like this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then no. Every pregnancy is different for every person, and I will say that countless times, because it's so true, and we can't continue to treat every single person who is laboring the same. We can't hold them to the same standards in terms of this is when you should be this many dilated and blah, 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 blah. You know where I'm going with this. It's ridiculous. So just keep in mind that if you're not progressing as quickly as you think you should be, or as doctors say you should be, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a red flag. It's just because that's how nature does it. I don't know how else to explain it, but you guys, I feel like you get the gist of it. So phases and stages of labor do not just happen bing, bang, boom. They take their own time, and you could, like I said, be in early labor for up to 24 hours, and then your transitioning phase could be like 10 minutes, and then your active labor could be like 20 minutes. It's just, we don't know, and you can't predict these things, and it's really more so going with the flow and trusting your instincts and trusting your body. And that is on stages and phases of labor, and why you should not think, based on movies and things that you've seen growing up, that your water's going to break and your baby's going to fall out. Because I promise that won't happen. And I've been saying a lot throughout this episode, particularly, that your water's not just going to break and gush everywhere, and that is 100% true. That very rarely happens for people. Usually it's just like a slow trickle, or it feels like you're peeing yourself like a slight bit, not like you just like pissed yourself and it's leaking through your panties all over the floor. Like, that's just not realistic. Like I said, it's usually just a small trickle of fluid. And if your water breaks, you are lucky, because a majority of the time your water is going to break during the pushing phase. So when you're actually pushing the baby out, that's usually when a lot of women's or people who are pregnant, water does break. And if you've ever seen a video of someone giving birth, you'll notice that after the baby comes out, there's like a gush of fluid. And yes, that will still happen if your water breaks naturally and you're like slowly leaking. But for the majority, that a lot of that liquid is your water, or like the amniotic fluid, that is being broken as the baby is arriving. And sometimes your water doesn't break at all, and the doctor will go ahead and just break it for you, which again is totally normal and will not cause any harm to the baby or yourself whatsoever. So then after you have your baby, it's not normal for the doctor to just like hold up the baby Lion King style at the end of your crotch and, oh my god, here's your baby, look how beautiful. And then the nurses whisk them away and do all of its testing, blah, blah, blah. That's not really accurate either, because there's been abundance of studies on how skin on skin is so important after birth for the mother and the baby. And so that is seriously encouraged whenever you have your baby. They will really try to put the baby right on your chest, unless obviously there's complications, and they absolutely have to take the baby to be treated. But if it's a healthy baby, they will put the baby right on your chest, and you can request delayed cord clamping, and then they often will now try to do the kangaroo care, they call it, which is like taking the temperature and, you know, all of that good stuff, whatever testing they do after to the baby. They try to do that stuff while the baby is actually on the mother or the person who just gave birth chest. So that's such a wonderful thing, and we've come a long way, because movies did actually depict that accurately. For a long time it was, here's your baby, maybe they put it on the chest for 2 seconds, and then they took it to be tested and wrapped and all of that stuff. But now we're seeing such a change in just the way that's handled, and it makes me so happy, because skin on skin is honestly so important, and the studies are continuous when it comes to that. So it's really cool that even now we're still finding out how important it is. Okay, and then one of the last things that I want to touch on in this episode is the fact that people after they give birth on TV and in movies are portrayed to look exactly the same as they did pre-pregnancy, which is a fucking joke. Like, no, I'm so sorry. You are not going to look Miss Skinny Minnie after. When the baby is out, your stomach is not going to shrink. Like, you are still going to have a little belly. It's going to look like you're still pregnant postpartum, and that will eventually go away, but it doesn't go away the second that your baby comes out of your stomach. And a lot of women have a little bit of swelling, which is really normal, especially in the 3rd trimester. You're carrying all that weight, you're carrying all that extra fluid. That doesn't just go away like 10 minutes after you give birth. It doesn't. Your body has a lot of healing to do, and I think that's where a lot of shame comes from in terms of like postpartum bodies and not getting in shape quick enough and just not being this ideal woman who snaps back. And it's not fair, because our bodies aren't designed to do so. They're designed to carry the baby and then they're designed to rest after with the baby and able to recover and heal. And I want you guys to know that you don't have to be worried about your body post-pregnancy, because if it doesn't snap back within 6 months, it doesn't mean your body's going to stay like that forever. It just means that it needs a little bit more time, and you can't rush these things. And unfortunately, you just have to, not unfortunately, don't even think like that. Just embrace your body, because it's beautiful, and you just had a baby and you earned your fucking tiger stripes. So wear them fucking proudly. And that's how I feel about that. All right, I hope you guys learned a ton throughout this podcast, and I hope you learned to look at pregnant people on television and in movies under a different light and a different scope, and just not take that stuff to face, because it's not reality, and you're beautiful and your body is perfect. You're gonna handle pregnancy in your own way. If you're a mom or a person who is a parent already and you are feeling some type of way about your body, don't. You're so fucking beautiful. And don't let society depict how fast you bounce back. And that's what I'm going to leave you guys with. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day, morning, evening, whenever you're listening to this, night, I don't know. You guys are amazing, and as always, feel free to reach out with any topics you want me to cover, any feedback. I love hearing from you guys, and yeah, that's it. All right, see ya.